Our story starts where we left off, in the newly founded Umayyad Caliphate, in 661 AD, when Muawiyah has recently seized power across the Caliphate. He would bring a series of reforms, but his first one would be changing the capital from Medina to Damascus, the new capital, where power would be centered around. Muawiyah's reign would have a main theme, the neighboring Byzantine Empire to the west. If you remember from our last video, the Byzantine Empire was extremely weak, and Muawiyah wanted to capitalize on this. He did this by launching a conquest in Byzantine North Africa. Umayyad troops marched in and successfully captured it. Meanwhile, in the east, a campaign was launched against Hindu Maharajas, where the Umayyads seized Makran. But perhaps Muawiyah's most famous campaign would occur in the Byzantine heartland, in the capital city of Constantinople, where Muawiyah would order a siege of the city. Muawiyah ordered the construction of an Islamic navy and sent his son Yazid to sail near Constantinople. There, the Byzantine navy intercepted their ships and naval battles occurred. To get a better look, we have to zoom in to a map of Constantinople. Constantinople had fortified city walls, which made it hard to enter. The Umayyad and Byzantine ships fought long and hard, but the Byzantines gained the upper hand. This is mainly due to Greek fire being used by the Byzantines. The Umayyads were forced to make the landings without naval support. The emperor of the Byzantines, Constantine IV, was ruling at the time. Both sides got ready for a traditional siege, but without Umayyad naval superiority, the Byzantines were able to just ship their food in. The siege would last 4 years and would end up in an Umayyad withdrawal and defeat. Although the siege was an Umayyad defeat, it allowed the Umayyads to capture the islands of Crete and Dodecanese. Conflict still continued as a long-term conflict between the Byzantines and Muslims. Muawiyah also divided the Caliphate into 4 sections: Arabia, Iraq and Persia, Egypt and North Africa, and Syria. Muawiyah continued Usman's policies of bureaucratization. He also developed Islamic politics, increased the rights for non-Muslims, and he focused more on Arab nationalism over the Islamic faith. Just like Usman before him, he gave power to provincial governors, and he created a regional administration. He would also establish the Umayyad dynasty, which made the Caliph a monarchic position to be passed down. In the Umayyad Caliphate, the Caliph lived in a palace and enjoyed great luxury. So, everything in the Umayyad Caliphate was going great, right? Well, not exactly. If you remember, the previous Caliph before Muawiyah was Imam Ali, who was remembered as a hero due to him being very close to the Prophet Muhammad of Islam. And with Muawiyah having fought Ali, it put a bad look on Muawiyah's reputation. After Ali died, Muawiyah started spreading the propaganda that Ali was a traitor, but that was far from the truth. This, paired with the fact that Muawiyah's governors were corrupt, caused a lot of resistance against the Umayyads and Muawiyah. But many people also appreciated Muawiyah's reforms, so many of them backed down. And things calmed down. That was until Muawiyah died in 680. Muawiyah would make a council to pick his successor, but it would be rigged to get Muawiyah's son, Yazid, in power. Sadly for the people of the Umayyad Caliphate, Yazid's reign was filled with corruption. Yazid spent most of his time in a palace and was remembered as greedy. His love for alcohol and lavish lifestyle distorted the image of Islam. But worst of all, if anyone opposed Yazid, they would be brutally murdered or imprisoned. These factors made resistance against the Umayyads and Yazid at an all-time high. But mainly one man rose up, the Imam Hussein in Medina. But who was this man, and how was he able to challenge the Caliph himself? For that, we have to look at the Islamic Prophet Muhammad's family tree. Muhammad married Khadija. Their daughter would be Fatima. Fatima would marry Ali, and their son would be Imam Hussein. So, the Imam Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet of Islam. If you are thinking, if he was the grandson of the Prophet himself, then why wasn't he Caliph? Well, that's what the people of the Caliphate were also thinking. Hussein marched to the city of Kufa, where he tried to gain support, but Yazid threatened anyone who would support Hussein. Yazid also gave bribes to the people of Kufa, and in an act of cowardice, the people of Kufa left Hussein without any support. So, at Karbala, Imam Hussein and Yazid met, and a battle occurred. Now, Yazid had a large army of 5,000, meanwhile Hussein had 70 volunteers. The Imam Hussein knew he wouldn't win the battle and gave a religious sacrifice. He sacrificed his life and was martyred, and his bravery and courage is still remembered to this day. The Umayyad Caliphate now went through a period of complete civil war and political instability, known as the Second Fitna. It starts when a man named Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr revolts against Yazid and the Umayyads. Yazid would die and be replaced by Muayyad II. Muayyad II was unable to stop al-Zubayr's revolt, and al-Zubayr was able to take a large amount of territory from the Umayyads, even managing to take Kufa in Iraq. Al-Zubayr would continue to be a thorn in the back of the Umayyads. As if things couldn't get any worse, Arabia and Egypt fell to nomadic tribes. Muayyad II would be unable to do anything about these revolts and would die soon after. He would be replaced by Marwan. Marwan would send armies into Egypt and brought it back into the Umayyad hands. Marwan would die shortly after and be replaced by Abd al-Malik, and under his reign, things would change greatly. A man named al-Muqtar would revolt and carve out his own Shia Caliphate. A religious sect called the Kharijites would gain control in Arabia and South Persia. With the arrival of the Kharijites, Persia completely fell. The conflict continued and the situation got worse, but Abd al-Malik and the Umayyad Caliphate would have a trick up their sleeves: the Umayyad army. The Caliphate had an army before, but it was disorganized into volunteers. Abd al-Malik changed that and organized the army into a proper army with divisions and organization. This army would retake most of the Umayyad territory, re-establishing control over the Caucasus, Persia, and Arabia by 692 AD. Abd al-Malik ordered Mecca to be besieged. The holy city was besieged, but al-Zubayr died mid-siege, and due to that, his caliphate fell. Abd al-Malik's creative leadership had successfully had the Umayyads retake all of their lost territories in the Second Fitna. Abd al-Malik also established a proper currency, and he reportedly built the Golden Dome in Jerusalem. His reign also saw conflict with the Byzantines. He also carried out an Arab nationalization, where he valued Arab culture more than the Islamic faith. Some scholars mark this as the turning point, when the Islamic Caliphate ended and the Arab Caliphate started. As I mentioned before, he reshaped the Umayyad army. With this army, he conquered Algeria. Abd al-Malik made long-lasting changes to the caliphate, and now he would die. He would be replaced by al-Walid, his son. Abd al-Malik left a great large army. Due to this, al-Walid's reign would have one main theme: conquest. He would start his series of conquest by launching an incursion into Central Asia and connecting the caliphate to the Aral Sea. Al-Walid's most famous campaign was in the Iberian Peninsula. This is where Moroccan Berber tribes came in contact with Umayyad troops, in which they secured a victory and were able to seize Morocco. You see, this opened the door to Western Europe. You see, the Umayyads and the Muslims greatly wanted to capture Europe. They did this by attacking the Byzantines in the east, but now they had another opening into Europe. There sat the Visigoths of Spain. The Umayyads chose Tariq ibn Ziyad to lead a campaign against the Visigoths. On the Spanish Visigoth side was King Roderick. Both men came into conflict, but Roderick unexpectedly died in battle, allowing Tariq ibn Ziyad to take the Iberian Peninsula. Iberia adopted a new Muslim cultural identity, and many great mosques with great architecture were built in Iberia. This famous painting was also taken of Caliph of Damascus al-Walid accepting gifts. Al-Walid also built the Grand Umayyad Mosque of Damascus. Al-Walid had successfully asserted Umayyad control over modern-day Iberia, Morocco, and Turkmenistan. Al-Walid would die and be replaced by Suleiman. Suleiman would attack the Zoroastrian Ayyubids and successfully conquer the South Caspian Sea. Suleiman also focused on the Byzantines. He launched further campaigns against them, including yet another siege of Constantinople. For the third time, the great city was besieged. This time, a different strategy was employed. Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik would march through Anatolia to Constantinople, capturing towns along the way. There, in Constantinople, the Umayyad armies besieged the city. This time, the Umayyads were heavily prepared, with siege battalions and proper food supply, and naval supply. But the siege has too many details to cover in this video, so I would highly recommend watching this video by Kings and Generals, which talks about the specific siege of Constantinople in depth. But all you have to know is that the siege lasted 1 year and failed. Suleiman would die and be replaced by Umar II, who was the great-grandson of the original Umar II, which we talked about in part 1. Umar II would make peace with the Byzantines. His reign focused on converting Jews and Christians to Islam, which was partly successful. He would die in 720 and be replaced by Yazid II, who spent most of his reign in a civil war with the Kharijites. He would die shortly after and be replaced by Hisham. Hisham would be greedy and extract a lot of taxes from the people. He was unpopular and centralized all his power in Damascus, where he ruled as an autocrat, basically a dictator. And also, many of his governors were against him. He restarted campaigns against the Byzantines, but he found no success. Perhaps his most famous campaign would be in Iberia, where he attempted expanding into Western Europe. So the Umayyad army prepared, but something was in their way. The French, also known as the Franks, led by Charles Martel. A battle raged on between the Christians and the Muslims. Both sides saw this point as decisive. If the Umayyads won, they would easily take Western Europe. Meanwhile, Christian kingdoms and the French saw this battle as the last-ditch attempt to save Christianity from Muslim expansion. And at the Battle of Tours in 732, the Umayyads suffered a major blow, permanently halting the advance of Muslim expansion in Western Europe. Charles Martel and the Christians had secured a major victory. The battle weakened the Umayyad army greatly, but what was even worse was that the Berber tribes revolted from the Umayyads. The Berbers were successful and cut the Caliphate in half. In the east, against the Khazars in the Caucasus, conflict occurred, as well as against Turkic mercenaries. Border conflicts grew and weakened the Caliphate further. Zayd ibn Ali also launched a revolt in Iraq. Hisham died and would be replaced by Al-Walid II. In Al-Walid II's reign, the cracks in the Caliphate grew larger. Al-Walid II didn't have a long reign, as Yazid III launched an insurgency and took control over the throne, killing his predecessor. Yazid III promises to make changes and reforms, but he died after 6 months and he was replaced by Ibrahim. But he would abdicate after just 2 months. He would finally be replaced by Marwan II, and under his reign, the situation got much worse. His governors and army rebelled. Meanwhile, the Byzantines took advantage of this instability and launched attacks. But mainly, the Umayyads' downfall would come when ethnic nationalists, Shias, Kharijites, and basically everyone who opposed the Umayyads fled to modern-day Turkmenistan. The reason they chose Central Asia was because the Christians governed the Muslims there, and the Umayyad opponents exploited this to encourage the people to revolt. This would be the Abbasid revolution. All the Umayyad opponents gathered under the leadership of Abu Muslim and marched across the Caliphate with black flags. The opponents were easily able to march across Persia and kill Caliph Marwan II, and they would then go on to establish the Abbasid Caliphate, ending our story. Wait, what's that area? Did I forget to color in the map? Well, no. You see, when the Abbasid revolution seized the throne, they killed all of the Umayyad dynasty, princes and princesses, except one lucky prince, Abd al-Rahman, who was able to flee to Iberia, in which he would continue the Umayyad dynasty, but with a different name, the Caliphate of Cordoba. And finally now, that ends our story.